A warm welcome to Business Daily right here on Trust TV. I am Yusuf Akogu. The Monetary Policy Committee of the Central Bank of Nigeria is meeting today. The meeting actually started yesterday, but the resolution and, of course, the decision of the MPC will be made public at the end of the meeting later today. We are here to bring you up to date with all the development from that sector. And just to also let you know that the Central Bank of Nigeria has revoked the operational license of about 139 microfinance bank operating in Nigeria. Of course, quite a whole lot of issues there happening to that bank. If we can show you some of those banks, the list of those banks are right there on your screen. You have the like of Atlas Microfinance Bank, Blue Whale Microfinance Bank, Everest Microfinance Bank, and a whole lot of them, about 139 of them. Their operational license has been revoked by the CBN. Some of the reason given by the CBN is that the type of business for which the license were issued for a continuous period of 6 months. Of course, many of them were actually deviating from the original plan for which they were actually set up. They also failed to fulfill or comply with the conditions subject to which their license were granted, or failed to comply with the obligation imposed upon them by the Central Bank of Nigeria in accordance with the provision of Banks and Other Financial Institutions Act 2020, Act number 5. So these are some of the reasons why their operational license were actually revoked. There are some of the banks have the like of Brass Microfinance Bank, Michika and Diago, FCT Microfinance Bank, Omra, and a whole lot of them, about 139 of them, and of course a couple of other mortgage banks were affected in that exercise. So we keep a tab with CBN and see the reaction that we will get from some of these banks. We frankly, we hope that some of them will react to this decision by the Central Bank of Nigeria. So from there, we move now to the stock exchange to give you an update from what transpired on the floor of the capital market yesterday, Tuesday. Of course, today is Wednesday, mid-trade is on, but again, we feed you with what happened yesterday. The market closed positive 0.48% at the close of business yesterday. And of course, the all-share index there standing strong there, way above 50,000 basis points, while the market cap added over 200 billion yesterday to the market capitalization. Of course, the volume of trade 350.974 million, value at 5.169 billion in a deals worth 5,946. A quick look at some of the top gainers for yesterday. Of course, we have the like of Transcorp. Transcorp gained 2 naira 90 kobo yesterday to close strong there, 9.85%. And of course, triple leg there also gaining 3 naira 24 kobo to close a positive 9.83%. And Unilever Nigerian PLC, one of the oldest company operating in Nigeria, gaining a huge number there yesterday, 14 naira 70 kobo to also close positive there, 9.70%. Of course, we could look at some of the losing stock yesterday. We have the like of Shelaram closing negative there, losing 1 naira 63 kobo there to close negative 9.94%. And of course, Sanoso also closing downward there, 48 kobo it lost there to close positive there, negative rather, 9.43%. And if you go down, Silencing closing losing 3 naira 20 kobo, and of course to close downward 8.83%. We look at some of the top trades of the day. We have the banking sector. They have been dominating that segment of the market for a couple of weeks right now. We have the United Bank for Africa, UBA, one of the Taiwan bank in Nigeria, closing 62.4 million volume of shares of that company was traded yesterday. All the banks on the top trade table today are actually Taiwan Bank. You have Zenith Bank and of course Guaranty Trust Holdings, the one we now call JITCO, also closing strong there on the activity chart. 59 million volume of shares of that company of Zenith Bank and 31.7 million volume of shares of JITCO were actually exchanged hands among investors on Tuesday. Of course, quickly we look at what we have from the rest of Africa. Of course, Botswana Stock Exchange in the southern part of the continent closed flat yesterday, though on a positive side. It maintained that position for the day. And of course, the Nairobi Stock Exchange down there in the Eastern Africa country, closing strong there at 0.72%. And of course, in the red zone is the Ghana Stock Exchange, Nigeria next door neighbor. Of course, down there in West Africa, 0.95%. These are the pattern of trade that we saw from the rest of Africa on Tuesday. Of course, we'll keep it up with the market and of course give you updates on all the development as it's unfold in markets in Nigeria and of course the rest of Africa and around the world. But for now, we go on a quick break. When we come back, we're looking at a whole lot of issues today in the Nigerian economy: exchange rates, debt burden, inflation rates, a whole lot of them. We'll discuss them when we come back from this break. Don't go away. Glad to have you back. It's still Business Daily right here on Trust TV. And I have my guests in the studio now. We'll go into our discussion. Quite a whole lot of issues we want to look at here. Inflation rate, monetary policy rate, exchange rate, taxation, debt, and of course the issues in the Nigerian oil and gas sector. And I have with me in the studio partner and chief economist at PricewaterhouseCoopers, Andrew Nevin. Glad to have you here in Trust TV on Business Daily.
So it's great to be with you. Really great to see you.
Absolutely. Maybe we'll start from the meeting today, the MPC meeting today. What are your expectations from that meeting?
Well, I mean, I don't usually have expectations about the future. Don't like making predictions. But I mean, we're in a situation where inflation is higher than interest rates. That's not where we should be. A lot of the world was in this after the great financial crisis. We had repression of interest rates, zero interest rates, negative interest rates. So the MPC rate monetary policy rate remains well below inflation. So I expect there'll probably be an uptick in the rate.
Probably an uptick. And if you look at the uptick, that has happened in the last couple of meetings of MPC, and it doesn't seem as if their effort is yielding any positive result. Inflation rate has continued on the upward trajectory.
Well, I mean, I've said over the years when we've had MPC meetings, I mean, the MPC is probably one of the most technically competent groups in the country. They know how to analyze this. They make the right decisions. But monetary policy isn't going to fix the economic challenges we face. I mean, they're doing their part of it. But the real reason we have inflation doesn't have anything to do with what the CBN is doing. They're not the causes of this inflation.
Talking about inflation, I'm worried that is it that we, the CBN, are not actually doing what suit our own environment? It looks as if they are looking at the rest of the world and actually probably copying what is happening in other economies.
Well, as I said, I don't think the CBN is causing inflation. If we're really honest with ourselves about why we have inflation, there are two fundamental reasons in my view. One is insecurity. I mean, the biggest economic challenge in this country is insecurity, and particularly for inflation. With insecurity, farmers don't plant, they don't harvest, there's less food, so there's the same amount of money chasing less food. When we get food inflation, that's the classic definition of inflation. The number two reason we have inflation is because the federal government has allowed the level of oil production to decline over the years. So when I arrived in the country, it was over 2. Many years it was 1.7, 1.8. Went to 1.3, nice. 1.2, 1.1, 1.0. So, and we've got the worst of all possible worlds. I mean, we have high oil prices because of the invasion of Ukraine. So we have high oil prices and low production and the foil subsidy. And when you take all of those together, what does it mean? It means, in fact, there's no net benefit to the country, to the federal government, to the Federation account. There's zero money has gone from the NMPC to the Federation account in 2022 and 2023. And that, of course, means we have pressure on the exchange rate and things we have to import. I mean, you look at the equipment in the studio, you create tremendous value with this equipment, Absolutely. But you still have to pay in foreign currency for it. So those are the two primary causes, is the insecurity and the reduction in the oil production. And so it's totally homegrown. It's a little bit like in the case of the United Kingdom, if you watch the news there, the Chancellor comes out and says all these external factors are creating the economic difficulties. The biggest reason the economy is struggling is because of Brexit, and they created the situation themselves. The biggest reason we have high inflation is because of insecurity and because of the decline in oil production, and those are things that Nigeria can address themselves.
But it seems that the government of the day is not aware of some of these things that you have actually mentioned, because what the CBN told us is that the only way to control inflation is for them to tighten the monetary policy rate. That they have done a couple of weeks, like we saw on the screen earlier on. We now have our rate now, MPR now stand at about 18%. That is a huge number, and there's also a prospect of them adding more basis point to it at the end of the meeting today. Do you think that has in any way contributing to solving the problem at all?
It's just a symptom, right? I mean, if you've got 22%, 23% inflation, I mean, it's an ironclad rule in economics that your inflation rate should be lower than your interest rate, or the other way around. Interest rates have to be higher than inflation rates. That's how economics is supposed to work. And of course, many developed countries disobeyed this rule during that period of low interest rates, negative interest rates, and I think they're now paying the price. I mean, we're still in a situation where interest rates are below inflation on that. So that means if you go out and you buy federal government paper, one-year paper, bonds, you're actually losing money because you're earning what I think 15, 16% on some of those bonds, and it's 22% inflation. Even if you earn 18 or 19%, it's 22% inflation. So we still have a situation where it's very difficult to save. And as I said, the CBN didn't cause this inflation. It was caused by other factors. They're doing the right thing from a technical sense in managing the monetary policy, as they've always done, but it doesn't fix other structural issues in the Nigerian economy.
Absolutely. Tightening was also what IMF suggested at their last meeting.
So not that I necessarily want to agree with the IMF. There are many things I disagree with the IMF on. So but yes, in this case, I think we'll see a little bit of tightening. But as I said, this is a symptom, not the cause of what's happening in the country.
Okay, fantastic. You made mention about exchange rates. That is an area that I think we also should look at. If there's a graphics that the director can put it on the screen for us now to actually look at the exchange rates. In 2015, exchange rates, the Naira to US dollar was 183.6. As at May 11th, we're having a 745. That is in the parallel markets. That is where most Nigerians actually go to get forex. And if you look at the inflation numbers, 22.22% as at April last month. That's according to the data that was released by NBS. And of course, if you recall, in April 2015, we have less than 10%, that is a 9.01%, not up to double digit. And if you look at the debt profile of Nigeria, it's expected to hit 77 trillion by next month. That is if you add the ways and means of over 22 trillion. And of course, if you recall, in 2015, we're there at a meager 12.12 trillion, so to say. If you are looking at all these numbers, what impression does it give you? Are we growing as a nation?
Let me start with the debt number, because about 2017, 2018, people started to ask about the debt, and I talked about the debt. And at the time, what I said was, we don't have a debt problem, and I don't think we have a revenue problem, and we can come to that. I mean, I know the excellent Honorable Minister of Finance, Budget and National Planning says we have a revenue problem. We have a growth problem. I mean, this entire period from 2015 to now, I think the average growth rate has been less than 2%. I mean, we've had a little bit higher recently because of rebounding from COVID, but less than 2%. We have population growth of 2.4, 2.8, 2.9, some people say 3%. So anyway we analyze this, we've got poor per capita over this period of time, and of course the debt's increased. Now, one of the things that this administration has said that I'd like to address is, we've invested in infrastructure, but I'm not sure when we look at what's happened, this infrastructure has been productive. So I mean, we take in the case we're in Abuja right now, I think there was $465 million spent on the Abuja CCTV camera system. I don't see the camera system. I don't know what the benefit of it is. I mean, we had $500 million spent on the new terminal, the Lagos International Terminal. As far as I understand, it's not being used. So that's $1 billion of dead capital. We've had capital spending going into Kaduna Refinery, Warri Refinery, Port Harcourt Refinery. There's no refined products, so that's dead capital. We've had Ajaokuta Steel absorb what it's absorbed over the last 8 years, and there's no steel that's coming out. We have the Kaduna Abuja Railroad, I think about $700 million that was spent. Absolutely. Because of the security situation in the country, we don't get any benefit from that. So you look at all this infrastructure spending, and today the administration continues to say, we've delivered on infrastructure. I'm having a hard time seeing it. So what I see when I see this debt number is there's been spending, but we've created more dead capital. I mean, PwC wrote the paper in 2019 and said we're a wealthy country, we just have too much dead capital, too many assets not producing a return. But in many cases, this investment is not producing a return. So in fact, the federal government infrastructure has often created more dead capital in the nation. On that. So that's how I view the debt situation. I mean, in terms of the exchange rate, as I said a little earlier, I mean, just fundamentally, what do you have to do? You have to export something to counter your imports. We need certain imports. We're not going to produce computers very soon. We're not going to produce cell phones very soon. We're not going to produce cars very soon. I don't think that's a problem. We have lots of things that we can export, but we're obviously not exporting enough. But the number one export, of course, is the diaspora, which continues to grow in strength, and it just is amazing the impact it's having on the nation, on that in economic terms. We're also exporting more services that are delivered here. So companies like Outsource Global, which Amal Hassan, amazing heroine in Nigeria, has founded 1,500 people exporting for dollars. But the reason we're having this exchange rate crisis is largely because of we've allowed this decline to happen in the oil prices. So if the oil had kind of stayed at 1.7 or 1.8, we wouldn't be at 745. We might be at 400 or 500 because of the difference in inflation rates, but we wouldn't have gone from, I mean, when I arrived it was 160. or sorry, when I first arrived, I think it was 128. But when I moved here permanently back more than a decade ago, it was 160. Now it's 745. We need to sell more. And the number one thing that, you know, in a situation where we want to export, we've allowed our number one export, or number two export, because we always say grains are our biggest export, but the number two export, hydrocarbons, we've allowed to decline. I mean, remember, when it goes from 1.7 to 1.0, it's not like it's a third decline in exports, because we use 650,000 barrels a day. So if we produce 1.7 million, we're exporting 1 million barrels a day. If we decline down to 1.2 million barrels a day, we're only exporting 500,000. So we've actually more than cut in half our export in oil. That's why there's no money, as I said, flowing from NMPC to the Federation account, which then has a spillover effect in terms of paying salaries, state level, local government, you know, level, LGA level. They're not getting any revenue, and then of course the government has to borrow to fill the gap. So that's what created the Ways and Means issues, the 22 trillion, which is outside of the regulations that we have set up, which is now trying to get regularized. So all of these things kind of fit together on that. But you know, number one or number two priority after insecurity for the new administration is getting the hydrocarbon production back up to help balance the balance of payments crisis we have.
Fantastic submission there, Mr. Andrew. You have consistently said that Nigeria doesn't really have a debt or revenue problem. That the problem we have is growth problem. So if you're talking about having a growth problem, in what area of growth can you be specific?
Well, I mean, this economy should be growing. I mean, I'm not a big fan of GDP as a number, but, you know, economists use it. We all use it around the world. We all focus on it. I mean, this economy should be growing. The official number should be at least 6 to 8%. I mean, the central bank governor, Governor Emefiele, he's come out and said double digits. I mean, there's no reason we couldn't grow at double digits. I mean, China did this for 30 years. India is doing it now. We all understand the potential of it. I mean, we know this, right? So when the IMF or World Bank comes out and we have a debate, people ask me, 2.9 is not going to happen, 3.5, 3.8. My reaction to it is all of those numbers are a disappointment to the country. Unless we're talking 6, 7, 8, 10%, we're not going to solve our problems. So what we've consistently said is, we don't have a debt problem, because really debt to GDP even today remains quite low by African or global standards. We don't have a revenue problem, we have a growth problem. If we grow the economy, we'll be able to collect more revenue. We'll quickly find that this debt issue goes away. But you know, when I started saying this in 2017, we had very low debt. Now we're kind of creeping up, maybe gone from green to amber. So the time that we need to actually get the growth up is now. We don't have too many more years before we run out of a crisis. I mean, we all know we're spending about all of the revenue the government has on interest rates. That's not sustainable. But the only solution to it is growth.
The only solution is growth, and that is, I think, is a big message there to the incoming government. In a couple of days from now, we'll have a new government in place, and some of the challenges that this government will face is the issue of corruption. It's some of the things you have explained here. Where actually you talked about the issue of Abuja CCTV camera project that has not really been done. Now, what do you think this government should do to ensure that they run a corrupt-free system?
Well, I think
the incoming government, I mean.
You know, I understand, and you know, I'm not an expert in corruption, though I've lived here a long time, so we're all kind of aware of the issues. And I think no country has no corruption, so that's not the issue. I think one thing the government could do is not create programs that make it easy for corruption to happen. I mean, every time we face a challenge, so we have something like we want to build agriculture, so we create an anchor borrower subsidy, and then we are surprised a few years later when we examine it and we look at what happened, and we find out, in fact, there was a lot of diversion. We have a metering problem in the country, so let's create a subsidy for metering, and then we find out later that a lot of that was, in fact, diverted in the metering case. And of course, all of this ends up being debt on the federal government's balance sheet, and we get some enablers in this. So people like the World Bank lend money to be able to do this, or the Chinese. So if you take, for example, I mentioned the airport in Lagos, the international terminal. I think that money was lent by the Chinese, by the company that built it, CCECC, the construction company from China. And now we still owe the 500 million, even though we have an asset, it's not delivering any value. So let's not create more programs that are easily corruptible. You know, we really have to ask ourselves, this $800 million loan from the World Bank that's been approved for palliatives for the oil subsidy, you know, what is the purpose? How is that structured? I mean, anyone that's ever run an organization knows you can't in a matter of weeks or months, build an organization that can effectively distribute $800 million. So what's the purpose behind it? And obviously the biggest one is the foil subsidy. I mean, the system is set up for corruption. It's set up for the ghost ships that there really is no refined product coming in. It's set up for crossing the border and smuggling. And of course, it benefits the country you're going to, but it also benefits the Nigerian that's enabling this smuggling. So maybe one starting point is let's not create new programs that are easily corruptible on that, and that would be a good litmus test for what
absolutely,
we launch.
very interesting one. There shouldn't create programs that are easily corruptible. Before we go, let's look at taxation. Tax revenue in Nigeria, some have said, is very, very low. That there are very few Nigerians paying tax as it is. Now, what do you think we should do? Increasing the tax or widening the tax nets? Which is better?
Well, I'm going to start somewhere else on this. So if you think about this in terms of social contracts, so classic political science, Jean-Jacques Rousseau, what the people give and what they get, right? So when I arrived in the country, there was a very simple social contract. The government didn't ask for anything, and the government didn't give anything. And that was very simple. Maybe not ideal, but everyone understood the rules. As things have evolved, that can no longer hold for a number of reasons. So now we need a new social contract. But the problem, I think, in the country, or one problem, is that the way the government is going about it is to say, let's take more tax revenue before we show that we can use it wisely. So I listed out a number of things, and people draw the conclusion, I think rightly in our view, that a lot of times the tax revenue, the existing resources, are not used wisely. So how is it possible for the government who is not using resources wisely to come and say, actually, our next step is we're going to extract more from you? We'll figure out how to use it wisely later on that. And I think as a population, people are going to say that's simply absurd. So I think a really good step for the government would be to stand up and say, we recognize that this social contract is evolving. We recognize that we need to make sure we're giving something as well as getting something.
Absolutely.
We're not going to ask for more until we show some promise and actually address some of the ways that the resources we have today are not used wisely. But when we address that and show that we can use the resources more wisely, then we'll be in a position to come and ask, to widen the tax net, perhaps increase in some cases, and all of that. That would be my counsel.
Absolutely. Andrew Nevin, partner and chief economist at PwC, always a pleasure speaking with you. Time is always short when one is having this kind of conversation. I think we'll have a part 2 of the discussion again, quite a whole lot of issues to discuss. Thank you very much for your time on Business Daily.
Thank you, sir. Great to be here.
Absolutely, you're most welcome. And that is a wrap on our show today. Join us tomorrow again for more. I am Yusuf Akogu.